ginger cougar, and I was really sorry. It was yuck. I will avert my gaze. I didn't need to do that.
Nice to have you on the program, Professor Anne-Marie Joutel. Thank you. Some pretty shocking names there.
Just hold on, because Mark's just looking up ginger cougar now as we speak.
Right, yeah. No.
This is just crazy, Wallace. I mean, look, it's not even being Boise or whatever. It is just beyond anyone's sort of concept of what's sort of reasonable or acceptable. And it's just, I was staggered, actually, when I read that opinion piece, that this stuff actually existed in that form.
Susan?
Yeah, look, I think words and labels matter. It entrenches stereotypes, and even if, when they came up with those names, that was broadly acceptable, it's not acceptable now, so why are they still there? They should have been removed a long time ago. Yeah.
By the way, my apologies too for the listeners. There's some technical issues going on here with some echo. There is a certain button that has been pushed, and you might be able to hear a phone online now. Oh, that's better. Are you still there, both of you?
Yes, we are.
Yes,
all right. We had a big response this afternoon to war topics. I worked in an international hotel in Holland in the 70s. The hotel was a stayover for a number of airline crews. They all had Brute. I remember the smell. We room cleaners couldn't resist the odd sample. I actually loved the smell. And going back to Susan Hornsby Alex, I've been thinking, when the honorific Ms. was introduced, it was intended to be equivalent to Mr. and therefore not to make any distinction between a married Mr. or unmarried Miss woman. Miss has faded out, thankfully, and it's time that Mrs. did too. It should be that both men and women are not judged by their marital status or gender bias. You agree with that, Susan?
Oh, look, I agree. If it was Mr., Ms. and mix, that would be an improvement.
Good on you. All right. Hey, you've been wonderful. Susan Hornsby-Gallick, Mark Sainsbury, thank you very much.
Thanks, Wallace.
For being with me this afternoon. I'm Wallace Chapman, 3:45. See you tomorrow. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, Public Expenditure 101, Auckland University fails the exam. An investigation slams its purchase of a posh Parnell pad for its Vice-Chancellor to rent at cut-price rates. Now students are calling for a refund. As sea levels creep up, so do the risks to coastal homeowners. With fears, premiums will price people out of property insurance. A horror Hawke's Bay crash that killed 3 young women leaves the community reeling. Bleating like sheep, China hits back at New Zealand's concern over a doctored image hitting out at war crimes by Australian troops in Afghanistan. And delays at Auckland Port mean the wheels are falling off for a South Island cycle shop.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The Auditor-General has blasted the University of Auckland for spending $5 million on a house for its Vice-Chancellor. The university purchased the luxury Parnell house last year and rented it to Dawn Freshwater for half the market rent. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The Auditor-General's report says the university failed to show its spending was moderate and conservative, and it could not demonstrate a justifiable business purpose for buying the house. It says it's hard to accept that the university needed to spend $5 million on a house that would provide accommodation for Professor Freshwater and host 14 events over 2 years. It also says the number of events did not justify the 50% rent reduction. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The government has declared a climate emergency with support from all parties except National and ACT. The motion passed in Parliament this afternoon with the Prime Minister committing the public sector to going carbon neutral by 2025. State agencies must phase out the largest and most active coal boilers and purchase electric vehicles. Jacinda Ardern says the government has to get its own house in order.
How can we stand and take a leadership position amongst the private sector unless we take the same action that we expect of them? It will require government agencies to measure and reduce their emissions.
The ACT Party says the declaration of a climate emergency is a political stunt that offers no solutions. The Insurance Council is urging homeowners and councils to take the risk of flooding from sea level rises more seriously. A new report has found at least 10,000 low-lying coastal homes are at risk of inundation from rising seas and storm surges in coming years. The Chief Executive, Tim Grafton, says New Zealanders' desire to build cities and homes as close to the water as possible is now a problem. He says the risk is only going to grow.
We really do have to be thinking both at the local, central government level, insurers, bankers, homeowners and communities as to how we manage this very serious situation before it becomes an even worse one. We can already see today what the research is indicating, and so we should be applying our minds to it today.
Tim Grafton of the Insurance Council. RSA triple murderer William Bell has apologised for his crimes in 2001 in a High Court appearance in Auckland this afternoon. He's asking for a judicial review of his security classification after it was bumped to maximum last year. At Poremoremo Prison, where he's serving a life sentence with a 30-year non-parole period, a fellow inmate accused Bell of plotting to escape. Bell says he had no intention to do so, and corrections officers didn't investigate the claims before changing his security rating. That cost him his job in the prison kitchen. He told the court he is not proud of the crimes that put him in prison.
I committed a horrendous crime that is reprehensible in any society. No amount of words can ever face the loss and the sorrow and the sufferings that I have caused to the loved ones of the victims.
William Bell. 3 young women were killed in a horror crash in central Hawke's Bay. The women were Dannevirke locals and worked at Silver Ferns Farms Takapo processing plant. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen is in the town.
The Dannevirke community is reeling from the news that 3 of its young people died after their car collided with a truck on State Highway 2 near Takapo yesterday afternoon. The women were part of the wider Dannevirke community. One was a current student of Dannevirke High School and 2 previously attended. The Tararoa District Mayor, Tracy Collis, says support teams will be in place around the district. A witness to the crash placed flowers at the site this morning and described yesterday as horrific. In Dannevirke, this is Tom Kitchen.
A strong wind warning is in force for the Remutaka Hill north of Wellington. The Transport Agency says drivers of high-sided vehicles and motorcyclists should take care. It's at 5:04. In sport, the New Zealand NBA basketballer Stephen Adams harbours no ill will at being traded and will always have a connection with Oklahoma. Adams has spoken for the first time since he was traded last month to the New Orleans Pelicans. He spent the first 7 years of his NBA career at OKC, where he says he built a special bond with the fans.
It's all part of the business, getting traded in there, and that isn't really the difficult part. The difficult part is the relationships that you build, and then you have to move on. Mate, it's not like I died or anything, you know. Like I'm going to see them again. So, I mean, that's fine. It ain't that sad.
Stephen Adams, and the new NBA season starts in 3 weeks. The Black Caps bowler Trent Boult is unsure just how cricket's new rules about shining the ball will impact the first test against the West Indies starting in Hamilton tomorrow. COVID-19 rules mean players aren't allowed to use saliva to shine the ball in a bid to make it swing more, but they can use sweat. Swinging the ball is Boult's primary weapon, and he says it'll be odd not to be able to polish it.
Train yourself to probably lick it and shine it all over the last 15 years or so, but I'm hoping I'm going to sweat like crazy to put something on it, but it's going to be interesting.
Meanwhile, Central District's batsman Will Young will make his test debut tomorrow, coming in for the injured BJ Watling. Tom Blundell will wicket keep in Watling's absence and drop down the batting order with Young opening. And that's the news.
Rugby stars in trouble.
There's a lot of people here, 18, 19-year-old idiots, who then became very good rugby players and became good examples of the community.
A road safety warning.
We have a number of accidents over history that have happened at this Christmas time. We are well aware of how dangerous this is.
Trump's legacy.
Donald Trump went doctor shopping and he found one who was willing to embrace the president's vision of COVID-19.
At home and abroad, Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. From Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine with isolated afternoon showers in Northland. A few showers tomorrow, clearing later. Waitomo to Wellington, including the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Fine, then cloud developing tonight. Brief rain tomorrow morning and then fine. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places of Wellington and Wairarapa for a time. Nelson City, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud, isolated showers inland Marlborough tomorrow, severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places for a time, and the remainder of Nelson, Buller and Westland, cloudy with patchy drizzle. Rain spreading north today, briefly heavy, easing to isolated showers tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland. Scattered showers becoming confined to coastal Southland and Fiordland tomorrow. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places easing tomorrow night. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, but there could be some rain tomorrow. RNZ National, it is 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome to the program. An investigation by New Zealand's public sector watchdog has slammed Auckland University over its purchase of a $5 million house in one of the city's poshest suburbs for its Vice-Chancellor to rent. The varsity bought the plush 4-bedroom Parnell house, complete with swimming pool and spa, and has been renting it to its highly paid VC, Dawn Freshwater. A Checkpoint investigation revealed she was paying cut-price rent, in fact about 50% of market rates. Auckland University justified the purchase and cheap rent by claiming the house would be used for fundraisers and hosting official university guests, and it was also a recruiting tool. The Auditor-General launched an inquiry after hearing about the Parnell property through the media. The investigation found the university failed to provide a business case for the purchase, and nor did the level of hosting justify the almost 50% rent discount. The decision to buy the house was not based on objective criteria, and Auckland University was unable to show the expenditure was moderate and conservative. And it also failed to recognise it was sensitive expenditure that would benefit a particular person or follow appropriate processes. Here's David Lemon from the Auditor-General's office.
One of the principles of sensitive expenditure is that there is a justified business purpose. And in this particular case, we weren't able to see one or weren't persuaded that there was one. So in that sense, no, it wasn't justified. It's important that the university and other organisations turn their minds in each case to whether they need to spend that amount of money. The question that they could ask is, could the same thing have been done for less?
Now there's a call for the Vice-Chancellor, Dawn Freshwater, to pay back months of discounted rent and for Auckland University to publicly apologise for the botch-up. Isabella Lenihan-Eichen is the National President of the New Zealand Union of Students' Associations. She believes the uni failed to read the room when it purchased the house that she calls the Parnell Mansion, and she applauds the inquiry findings.
Students have spoken out about this particular decision, and it is really reassuring that the Auditor-General agree that this was a complete kind of frivolous use of public and student money, and that they not only did not follow correct processes around sensitive expenditure, but they did not even follow their own internal processes around capital expenditure.
The report indicates that, in part, Auckland University justified the purchase by saying they would be hosting fundraising events at the property there, and that also they could be hosting university guests. Your response to that, given the findings of the report?
There are multiple venues located on the University of Auckland property that are completely fine to either host international guests or to host events for fundraising purposes. And I think that, you know, in light of all of the justifications that the university had, that is something that is interesting that has been brought to light by this particular report.
The report says there's little evidence to justify the 50% discount in rent that the Vice-Chancellor got. She was paying about $1,140 odd a week to rent the mansion. She's been in there for a while. What do you think of that?
I mean, this is the point that I think that really stirred students up, because when you look at it, the amount that the Vice-Chancellor was paying in comparison with what students pay for rooms and houses that, are just insulated, that may, just have a living room if they're lucky enough, or if they have to rent it out in order to further bring down their rent costs. It doesn't have any of the luxuries that this house had. This was something that was really concerning, and I'm glad that this report has really shone light on the fact that that was completely unjustifiable. I think in light of the fact that this report has come out and slammed that, I think there are two courses of action that need to happen. One is that they need to sell the house, and B, that the Vice-Chancellor needs to pay back and pay the full market rent for the time that she and her family have been in there, because it is completely, as this report has said, unjustifiable that purchase of the house on one hand, but also the fact that she was receiving a 50% reduction in the property's rent. And that just really, emphasises the lack of connection and the lack of realisation of what students and staff at Auckland University are paying to live in houses, that they can, just so that they can study or work at the institution.
How would you describe overall the university's process and decision-making around this purchase from your point of view?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think that if you have processes around capital expenditure, you need to follow them. And this was a situation where, despite having those processes, they did not follow them. I think the other thing is that it really emphasises the importance of having, universities are communities of staff and of students. And therefore, it's really important that students and staff are involved in decisions like this. Although universities and other institutions may dismiss these particular decisions as being things that students don't really care about, financial decisions are obviously said to be things that students don't have that much interest in, we do have a lot of interest in. And if we're actually going to be the communities of scholars that universities are known for, then it is really important that there's a diversity of kind of representation in decisions like this. And I think if a student had been involved in this particular decision, if a student had communicated the reality of being a student at the University of Auckland and the reality of the housing and the rental conditions that students live in, then I think that the university would have made a very different decision. So I hope that they really take on board the fact that they cannot continue to make decisions without strong student voice.
How transparent do you think they have been around this?
Well, it doesn't seem like they've been transparent at all. I think that they haven't even been transparent based on following their own processes. They haven't been transparent based on, following guidelines around sensitive expenditure. I don't think that they've been transparent to the university community about the actual purpose of why this house was purchased, this mansion was purchased for their Vice-Chancellor, and I think they need to they've front up and talk to the community about the real reason why they purchased this house.
So you want a refund on the market rent that the Vice-Chancellor was paying, you want the house to be sold immediately. Who does the buck stop with here, do you think?
Well, I think that the buck, obviously, this decision was made before the Vice-Chancellor, came into power. Obviously, it was part of her decision of coming to the University of Auckland. But I think that the council, the University Council and the University senior leadership actually owe an apology, because I think that ultimately they've not only breached internal processes, which as a university we should, and as students we should trust our universities to follow, but also they've breached the public's trust in terms of following guidelines around public expenditure. They've also just generally breached the trust of the community, because if they think that this is okay to purchase a $5 million mansion for their Vice-Chancellor, then they're completely out of line with the reality of being a student, the reality of being a staff member, and therefore they need to really earn that trust back, and that trust begins with an apology to their community.
When you look at that house, Isabella, What do you think?
Oh, it's just so extravagant and luxurious, completely unjustified.
The Auditor General's report also criticised the Auckland University for its lack of transparency about its spending and its refusal to answer media questions. We requested an interview with anyone from Auckland University. It declined our invitation and gave us a statement instead. It says the university accepts the report's findings and acknowledges there were shortcomings in the university's handling of the purchase process. It's commissioned independent advisors to undertake detailed reviews of the university's policies and processes relating to sensitive expenditure. Once completed, any changes the university makes in response to those reviews to its policies and processes will be made publicly available. The University of Auckland, it says, takes its responsibilities regarding the use of public resources very seriously. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. $5 million house in Parnell for the Vice-Chancellor who was paying 50% of market rent. The decision to purchase the property and the expenditure was signed off by a single person at the university. The former Vice-Chancellor didn't go before a committee. And that's another thing that the Auditor General has highlighted. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government's declared a climate emergency today and promised the public sector will go carbon neutral by 2025. We'll have more on that a little later, but the threat of climate change is all too real for some owners of low-lying coastal properties. They've been warned they may struggle to fully insure their property as the risk of storm surges and flooding grows too great for insurers. A new report funded by MB has found premiums could increase fivefold for some properties, and many of our most at-risk properties could be refused insurance completely in 20 years. John Bond reports.
Thousands of coastal homes will likely be subject to tougher insurance policies within the next 10 years, according to the report. This includes monetary caps on coverage or excluding climate-related hazards from the policy altogether, with rising sea levels giving storm surges a higher base to work from. 1 in 100-year floods could become 1 in 20. Tim Grafton, the Chief Executive of the Insurance Council, says that's a big risk to coastal homeowners and therefore insurers.
We have tended to build our cities on the coast, and we've often decided to live as close as possible to the high tide mark or as close as possible to the edge of a cliff. So sooner or later, these chickens will come home to roost.
Of our biggest cities, Christchurch and Wellington are identified as most at risk, then Dunedin and Auckland. Of our smaller cities, Napier and Tauranga were found to be most sensitive to sea level rises. The report co-author Belinda Story detailed how a rise in sea level of just a few centimetres brings significantly more flooding risk.
Just 10 centimetres of sea level rise in Wellington, for example, is enough to shift the probability of an event by 5 times. If you're at a 5% probability per year, then an insurer isn't going to be wanting to provide you with cover. That 10 centimetres is going to be arriving in Wellington in the next 20 years.
Ms Story says at some point that risk is not worth it to insurers, which could cause a domino effect.
The cost of insuring becomes so great that an insurer would rather not insure you than charge you a break-even premium. So once you lose insurance, then there's a very real probability that you'll have difficulty renewing your mortgage, and your local government's also going to be having to make some difficult decisions about the infrastructure that they provide to your houses.
In fact, the Bankers Association says having insurance is actually required to be eligible for a mortgage. So without insurance, there's no money on offer. At the core of sea level rise is climate change. The Minister, James Shaw, says the government is acting on the issue, but for some areas the risk of flooding is already prompting action.
There are some places that are opting for hard defences like seawalls and so on. That also carries some risk, of course. And in other areas, they're seriously discussing what we call managed retreat.
Tim Grafton says coastal property risk is something that really ought to be taken seriously from now.
We really do have to be thinking both at the local, central government level, insurers, bankers, homeowners and communities as to how we manage this very serious situation before it becomes an even worse one. We can already see today what the research is indicating, and so we should be applying our minds to it today.
He says at-risk properties which continue to be covered will be hit with higher premiums or excesses. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, aho.
Kiwis bleat like Aussie sheep, but don't condemn Afghan killings, was the headline on China's state-run media Global Times website today, as the diplomatic spat hurtles on. It's after New Zealand expressed concern over China's use of disinformation in a tweet that attacked Australia over the Afghan war crimes report and used a doctored image of an Australian soldier holding a knife to an Afghan child's throat. In response, China's questioned why New Zealand involved itself and whether that shows it supports Australia's actions in Afghanistan. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Australia is still waiting for an apology after Prime Minister Scott Morrison described the tweet from a senior official as repugnant.
It is deeply offensive to every Australian who has served in that uniform. It is utterly outrageous and it cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever.
New Zealand has formally registered its concern with China over the use of an unfactual post, which a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry said was surprising. In a press briefing, Hua Chunying suggested that by weighing in, New Zealand could be showing it supported Australia's actions in Afghanistan.
To be frank, when I saw reports that the New Zealand raised concerns to China about this picture, I'm astonished. What has this thing to do with New Zealand?
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand has not taken sides.
We certainly don't see it that way. If we saw, a visual representation published by Australia that was incorrect, that was a doctored image, for instance, we would raise that concern also. For us, it was a matter of principle. We've raised that concern. Now that we've done that, that's the matter as far as we're concerned.
She's not concerned about the risk of retaliation from China.
No, and I wouldn't articulate it in that way. There have always in our relationship been issues that from time to time we will raise in the way that New Zealand does, directly with China and Chinese officials, but we'll always do it from a principle perspective. We've said our bit, and we'll be leaving it at that.
China is New Zealand's largest trading partner with exports worth $20 billion a year. Professor Robert Asen from Victoria University says the major concern for both New Zealand and Australia is the economic bottom line.
China has shown with a range of countries that it is willing to put economic pressure upon them, and that's part of China's bag of strategies. So there's always that possibility, and I think that New Zealand policymakers are aware of that, and also that's one of the factors that has driven this emphasis on diversification of New Zealand's trade connections.
Last week, China imposed tariffs of up to 200% on all Australian wine imports, accusing producers of dumping wine into its market, which Australia denies. Former trade negotiator Charles Finney says New Zealand's free trade deal with China would not provide any protection if it looked at doing the same in New Zealand.
There is an early warning mechanism, so we'll know about it fast if they are planning to do something. But basically the rules are very similar, if not identical. So we would be vulnerable. I don't think that we will see this happen to New Zealand anytime soon, because I think the Australian situation is very different from ours.
Trade Minister Damien O'Connor isn't concerned about a trade backlash.
There's been a lot of rhetoric around. We don't engage in that at all. We don't support it. We'll just continue with what is a solid, sensible relationship with all of our international partners.
China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson says they have pictures and other facts, including the Australian Defence Department's report, to back its position. Ms Hua said if needed, China and Australia could provide all of this material to New Zealand. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The small community of Dannevirke is reeling after a crash yesterday that killed 3 young women who lived in the town. The crash happened near the small town of Takapo in central Hawke's Bay, where the trio were on their way to work. Our reporter Tom Kitchen has the story.
It was a horror smash. A truck and car collided, leaving 3 women dead. The road was closed for hours after, and today what remained were parts of vehicles, lights, bumpers and glass. Flowers have been placed on barriers beside the road. A woman who lived nearby was a witness to the crash and rushed to the scene when she heard a bang. When she arrived, she says 3 young boys came rushing towards her.
The young boy dropped down to his knees and wrapped his arms around my legs and just cried and rang family. They were totally in shock.
Today, she was placing flowers at the site of the crash.
We just went and picked some flowers and placed them on the area where the car had landed. Obviously, it was something that my mother was feeling that we could possibly do this morning, and yeah, it's pretty raw, and I actually don't have any thoughts in my mind. So even while I'm speaking to you, who knows where it's all coming from at this stage.
The girls who died, all aged under 20, had all been to Dannevirke High School. One was still a student there. Tararua District Mayor Tracy Collis, who's based in Dannevirke, says the girls played a big part in the local youth scene.
Well known in the community, a lot of connections, sport, whānau, teachers, students. It's really cut through the heart of the community, especially when young people tragically lose their lives.
Tararua Community Youth Service set up a memorial for the girls in their building in Dannevirke's town centre. Its manager, Jeannie O'Brien, says they've got a space where youth can congregate.
Young people can come and sit and sing, reflect, write some notes, remembrance notes, and just have a nice kai, just to be together. It's really important at these times that our young people aren't isolated and can sit and talk and reflect and share on the good things too.
Police were unavailable for an interview, but say the crash remains under investigation. 23 people have died on Hawke's Bay roads in 2020, the highest death toll in the last 5 years. Nearly 300 people have died on the roads nationwide this year. In Dannevirke, for Checkpoint, ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about Auckland University's house, the $5 million house that they purchased and were renting out to their Vice-Chancellor for rent that was about 50% of market rates. An investigation by the Auditor-General has found a number of flaws in the purchase by the university. Leah's got in contact to say it is not for the employed university person to pay back the rent. This was part of her job offer. While it's appalling and the university needs to go to task, it shows student bodies' ignorance of employment procedures. Now, this is in response to some of the students calling for the Vice-Chancellor to pay back the balance of that rent. Just a point of clarification there, Leah. The university has been very clear that the discounted rent was not part of the Vice-Chancellor's employment agreement. Employment agreements for employees at the university go before the Public Services Commission and they must be signed off. They have said there was no evidence that the house and the rental paid on that property was part of the terms and conditions of her remuneration. So she was getting it separate to her salary package. Others have got in touch to say, I'm an employee of the University of Auckland. The university is in a dire financial situation because of COVID. We have all been asked to rein in spending. Redundancies are threatened and there are no pay increases if promoted. The extravagant salary and perks for the VC are unjustifiable and a kick to the guts. Another person says there is a culture of arrogance among UOA senior management which needs to be changed. We personally experienced this from the admissions process, which is opaque and unaccountable. Another listener's got in touch to say great investment by the university, probably gone up in value by millions of dollars. Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Vets are hopeful a police dog that was shot in the jaw near Dargaville yesterday will eventually be able to return to work. Police are not yet releasing the name of the dog or specific details about his injuries. The dog was allegedly shot by a man who was in turn shot 3 times by police. The man was rushed to hospital and is receiving medical treatment. Today, vet Alistair Coomer told our reporter Nita Blake Person the dog is still in a serious but stable condition.
He's a lot better off than he was yesterday, and we're really happy with his progress.
Has it been touch and go? What were his injuries?
He's had, without going into specifics, he's had, I think everyone knows, he's had a gunshot wound, and he's got extensive injuries to his face, and it's been touch and go, but he's really rallied hard and is, as I said, in a stable position at the moment.
Was it just the one gunshot wound to his face?
I'm not going to comment on that.
The likelihood he'll make a full recovery from those injuries?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that if he continues on this recovery path, that he'll recover fully, but we're still taking it hour by hour, day by day at the moment.
What does that recovery path look like? How many surgeries? How long?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're fully aware of the extent of his injuries at the moment. He had a scan this morning that helped clarify all of that. We're not going to rush in to treat any of it. The worst thing that we could do is roar in there and try and patch him back together when he's not stable enough to handle that.
So no imminent surgeries?
No, that's right. We hope to continue to stabilise him over the next 24, 36 hours, and then maybe towards the end of the week we'll start doing the corrective part of his treatment.
Have any bullets been removed?
I'm not going to comment on that either.
What's the chances he will return to being a working police dog ever again?
That's the goal. So goal number 1 is for him to be alive at the end of the day. Goal number 2 is for him to go home, and then the ultimate goal, which I'm optimistic of, is that he'll go back to work.
It was a huge effort to make sure he got here and got the best care he received. How vital has the steps that came into place after the shooting been in making sure he has this relatively positive sounding prognosis?
Yeah, it's entirely related to everything that happened before he got here, actually. So he received outstanding first aid from his handler. He then got outstanding veterinary care locally up north, and then the transport down here helped massively to get him here in good shape. And then we've just continued along that path.
How is that handler going?
He's doing well in the grand scheme of life.
Spending a lot of time with the dog?
He sure is, yeah. They're hard to separate.
And so when is it probable that we might see this dog back in the force?
I'm not going to comment on that, just because I simply don't know. I mean, we'll be more confident that he's going to do well by the end of the week, and then again it's going to go from hour to hour to week by week, I think, going forward.
Hopeful still, though?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that was vet Dr. Alistair Coomer talking to our reporter Nita Blake-Person. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Queenstown gets a little bit of a helping hand when it comes to unemployed migrants. The mother of a murdered policeman wants harsher penalties for those guilty of killing an officer. And the government declares a climate emergency, but what does that actually mean? We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. It's time now for the headlines with Anna.
Thanks, Lisa. The University of Auckland has been blasted by the Auditor General for buying a $5 million house for its Vice-Chancellor. The university purchased the Parnell home last year and rented it to the incoming Vice-Chancellor Dawn Freshwater for half the market rent. The New Zealand Union of Students Associations, Isabella Lenehan-Eichen, told Checkpoint the Auditor General's report is reassuring. She now wants the house to be sold and the Vice-Chancellor to pay back the full market rent for the time she's lived there. The Climate Change Minister says the global crisis will now be treated as seriously as any civil defence emergency. Parliament has voted in favour of a motion to declare a climate emergency. James Shaw says this declaration means that the issue has the same level of equivalence as things like natural disasters. The police are at the scene of a sudden death in Kaiapoi, north of Christchurch. The call-out is at the home of local man Kenneth McCall, who died in October last year after being hit by a teenage driver fleeing the police. Mr McCall left behind his husband, Owen Fraser, who continued to live at the Kaiapoi residence. A police spokesperson says inquiries are ongoing into the circumstances of the death, but he doesn't believe it appears to be suspicious. RSA triple murderer William Bell has apologised for his crimes in 2001 in a High Court appearance in Auckland. He's asking for a judicial review of his security classification after it was bumped to maximum last year. At Poremoremo Prison, where he's serving a life sentence with a 30-year non-parole period, a fellow inmate accused Bell of plotting to escape, which he denies. A water main has burst in central Wellington, leaving 30 buildings without water. Wellington Water says it shut the water supply off to the buildings at 5 o'clock after the main burst on the corner of Cuba and Manners Streets. It hopes to have water reconnected by 10 o'clock tonight, and bottled water is available in the meantime. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and you've tuned in just in time for business news with Nicholas Poynton, who's joining me in the studio. Nicholas, loan sharks, the government's, it's cracking down.
Yeah, this is part of their move to sort of protect people from getting dragged down by insurmountable levels of debt. Currently, lenders, they do have a high level or a high obligation to ensure that borrowers are able to pay back the money they take on, but some lenders are shown to be more careful and diligent than others. That's the view of the Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark. So as part of these new requirements, lenders will have to make consistent inquiries both of the borrower's needs and objectives. That's to ensure that they are taking on an appropriate amount of debt, and they also need to verify borrowers' income and expenses and be satisfied that these repayments won't put people into financial hardship. So these, on the back of this announcement, it's been applauded by many, but not everyone. RNZ Business, we spoke to a lawyer today who specialises in the financial sector, and he says this crackdown on lenders is going to add a lot of red tape. He says there's already adequate rules in place, and these new rules are just going to create admin and extra costs for those lenders who are currently following the rules and are doing their jobs properly. He says essentially what he's saying is that the priority of the government should be focused more on getting money to those people who need it rather than stopping money going to those people who don't.
It's kind of interesting, the phrase, and I can't remember the exact words you use, but, they have to check that it's not going to put you in undue hardship. Well, they're in undue hardship if they're going to a loan shark for a loan, aren't they?
And that's and that. You know what that made me think is, how does a lender actually make sure these, do these checks and be satisfied? That's an interesting word that was entered into these requirements. They have to be satisfied that they won't put them into undue hardship. But, people can, there can be material adverse changes in people's circumstances, and all of a sudden someone is in hardship. And on top of that, they have to pay back the money that they owe on some loan they've taken.
Absolutely.
So those changes, they will come into effect in October next year, but hopefully will give lenders more time to get their heads around these requirements, make sure they have the effective things in place, but we might be hearing more from this, I think.
Okay, a lot of talk about climate change today, and you've got kind of a related story, the future of New Zealand gas production.
Yeah.
What can you tell us?
It's in question for the near term, shall we? So gas supplies, they are set to be reduced. That's because of several problems at the country's largest fields where gas is produced. So Contact Energy, they've been told its allocation will be cut by a quarter due to an unexplained fault in production. That's at the Pohokura field. The field's operated, that's the Austrian-owned company, not Australian, OMV. They've been investigating what's been going on, but they haven't really been able to find out why at the moment. They say that the outlook for next year could lead to a 40% reduction in gas production, and people may be wondering how that will affect them. Well, in 2019, when there was an outage at the same field where there was reduced and that led to reduced gas supplies, there was a sharp spike in wholesale electricity prices, and that affected thousands of New Zealanders. And it's not just this one field that's been affected. Production at the offshore Kupe field, which is our third largest in this country, they've had an equipment problem, so that's going to lead to a reduction in gas production as well. And this has led the gas lobby to come out and say that natural gas supplies are at risk, and they've used this as an opportunity to call for greater flexibility when it comes to those gas permits, because they say if we don't get these, we could be reliant on imports.
Interesting. Okay, what numbers do you have for us from the market?
Well, the NZX was down by a single point today to 12,729. So probably, not as bad as the slide we saw yesterday following, increased tensions between New Zealand, Australia and China. Our dollar is at 70.7 US cents, 95.7 Australian and 52.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business update there. The wheels have fallen off for a South Island cycle shop that's almost run out of kids' bikes ahead of Christmas due to the freight gnarl-up at ports of Auckland. Wensley Cycles in Invercargill says for the first time in its 75-year history, it won't have children's bikes on the shop floor, and it's had to ring customers to tell them their orders are unlikely to make it in time for the 25th. The beleaguered ports of Auckland is already under fire for major delays in clearing a backlog of cargo. And this week it suspended its automated carriers that unload containers after one robot went rogue and crashed. Owner of Wensley Cycles, Rob McMurdo, says the delays are utterly unacceptable.
It's just supply. And you don't mind when it's like the whole COVID thing and factories overseas shutting down and starting back up and being behind, but when it's us, it's a bit frustrating as New Zealanders, and we're not doing our job properly. That's the bit that's getting me.
So when you say it's us, who's not doing their job properly?
The Auckland Harbour, whoever's in charge of that. We've got boats sitting out in the Hauraki Gulf waiting to be docked and unloaded and get our product to us. And I don't think we're the only industry in that position. It's quite a few. Yeah, so it's very frustrating. Luckily, we've got some very good understanding customers that I've built up over the years, and yeah, we're working through it. We're working through it quite well. But I just wish some of these bigger companies would behave the same and remember who they're working for as a country.
So what are you missing right now, Rob? What's stuck on the boat that you really need now for the Christmas rush?
Kids' bikes. Look, I've been here just short of 40 years, and I'm just totally disappointed. Like, this is the first time ever in our history of a shop. Like, we're 75 years young this year, and this is the first time ever that I'm aware of that we haven't had kids' bikes for Christmas, which is, in my mind, unacceptable, but you've got to accept it. You just got to work around it, but it's tradition. You've got to make hay while the sun shines, and we're not able to. You know, and that's the frustrating thing about it. Like, we've got to take a bit of fat on for our winter months because it's quite seasonal. And living in Invercargill, I don't want to go on about weather, but sometimes it isn't great, and it doesn't turn people on to ride in gale force winds and rain. So summer's the time to sell bikes and do things, and it's not happening. It's not happening.
So, Rob, in terms of this busy Christmas season, that is basically what sets you up for survival for the rest of the year, is it?
Well, it puts us in a good place. Like, as long as you're running your business well and you've got a good reputation, yes, it does. And because it's hard times in the winter. Like, winters are getting a little bit better, but on the whole, winters are winter, and it doesn't really turn people on to go and do trails and ride with the family. They want to enjoy it. They want warm temperatures. So, yes, it does set us up for the winter.
So, Rob, if someone rocks up to your shop today with some fresh, crispy cash in their back pocket and they're looking for a bike for their kid, what is the deal currently?
We take orders, and we get on our bended knees and make sure that we can take an order rather than just, I'll go try somewhere else down the road or somewhere else in the country and hop online and not support the local scene, which on the whole has happened very well so far. But I've just spent all morning ringing customers and telling them the bad news that their kids' bikes and mountain bikes aren't going to be here till after Christmas. And it's quite hard. It's quite hard, but on the whole, people are very, very understanding. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 6 months, you know what's happening out there, and it's pretty hard. But New Zealanders or the Auckland Harbour Board is making it harder for us, really, and it's just unacceptable.
So literally, you don't have small people's bikes on the shop floor at the moment?
We've got what we've got, but that is going to run out really, really fast. And yeah, like, we've only got a handful of bikes. We've got no 24s, 20-inch geared bikes for young kids that are getting out with families a little bit more and going mountain biking. They're all gone. Like, they're gone till after Christmas. And we're a month out, you know, and it's crazy. It's just crazy. It's stupid.
So, have you had any conversations with Auckland Ports?
Not officially, no. No one, like, we've just heard it through our suppliers that, you know, they're working at 50% capacity and that's the way it'll stay. And that's all I've heard. That's all I've heard.
So, I mean, what do you make of their performance? What would you like to say to them?
Well, I know they're regulated, but that's my biggest bugbear in this country today is we're over-regulated. We're over-conscious about what might happen. We're not worried about supplying people with things now, and we can do. I'm disappointed in our number 8 mentality. It's getting dwindled, it's getting diluted, it's shiny bums sitting on seats that don't care. Someone else will do it. It's all of those things. It's just 40 years ago, I'm sure my parents or grandparents would have hopped on a boat, got a boat from somewhere, went out into the harbour and unloaded it and got the bikes and got the products in somehow. Or they'd run them round to another port or whatever. They'd make something happen, not sit out in the Hauraki Gulf for 2 or 3 weeks and say, well, that's just the way it is and that's the way it's got to be.
So, Rob, short version, you want them to get on their bikes and get moving?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Well, it just makes things happen. Like, I just can't believe the government's just sitting down and letting it happen. And like you say, like, why can't they write us a letter and say, look, we apologise, but this is what's happening, or whatever is happening up there. Like, we get nothing. I've had to ring around 30, 40 people this morning to tell them what's happening. Well, why can't they do the same? That's probably where I'm sitting.
And the delays are obviously hurting your business.
Well, of course they are. They're hurting everybody's business, you know, and it's frustrating, you know.
That's Wensley Cycles owner Rob McMurdo. In a statement, Ports of Auckland says we would like to apologise for any delays we have caused. COVID has caused all sorts of disruption this year, and that includes to import volumes, import demand patterns, and to our ability to handle freight. Our staff are working as hard as they safely can to get through the backlog, and we are hiring more people to help with the workload. It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The mother of a slain police officer has begged politicians to introduce harsher punishments for those who murder police. Diane Hunt's son, Matthew Hunt, was shot and killed during a routine traffic stop in Auckland in June. Today, she presented a petition to Parliament signed by nearly 40,000 people, asking for law changes so anyone convicted of murdering an officer gets a mandatory life sentence without parole. Hamish Cardwell filed this report.
28-year-old Matthew Hunt died in a hail of bullets after trying to pull a car over in the Auckland suburb of Massey in June. His mother, Diane Hunt, says he'd only been on the force for a couple of years and was hardworking and diligent.
He loved CrossFit and golf. He had a diving certificate. He was very, very physically active. Matthew prided himself in his health and, he looked after himself. He respected himself. He had a lot to live for.
Ms. Hunt says her son was targeted because of his uniform, and she wants others who put it on to be safe. Today she went to Parliament with a petition imploring politicians to make changes so her son did not die in vain.
The reason for my petition is simple. Matthew's death is a sobering reminder of the daily sacrifice our police officers make to ensure we can continue to live our lives in the manner in which we are accustomed.
The Police Minister Poto Williams says the petition will get the usual Select Committee scrutiny and would not commit to enacting the changes. She says the government is already working hard to reduce gun crime.
We're going to continue with our firearms legislation work, and that's a really important part of this. You know, we have gangs at a community level where we can do much more work in diverting young people from getting into gangs, but there's also the transnational organised crime that we're working on as well.
National Party Police and Justice spokesperson Simeon Brown says if the government won't act, his party will take up the fight.
This may well be an issue that a member also puts forward as a member's bill into Parliament to try and get some progress, to send a very clear message that National backs our frontline police officers who are on the front line serving New Zealanders, keeping us safe.
Mr Brown says the party does not support the widespread arming of the police, but his colleague and former police officer Mark Mitchell says gun crime is increasing and it's time police had the tools to deal with it.
I think that we have to reflect the reality of it now, and that is the fact we're seeing young officers like Matthew Hunt gunned down midday on the streets in Auckland, and so we have to make sure that if the crims are armed, then actually our police have got the tactical ability to be able to respond to that.
In Northland in recent months, there's been a spate of incidents where police have been shot at. Yesterday, a man opened fire on a police dog and in turn was shot 3 times, with both the man and the dog taken for medical treatment with serious injuries. Mr Mitchell says the incidents show the government is too soft on crime.
The public and communities want to know that the police are running the town, not the gangs. That's right. And at the moment, we're seeing a complete reversal of that.
Outside Parliament, Diane Hunt laid out 33 white crosses, representing all the on-duty officers slain since 1890. Law lecturer Kylie Quince says while all deaths are tragic, the data shows that the killings are very rare and that policing in New Zealand is actually fairly safe. She says changing legislation after extreme cases like Matthew's usually leads to bad law. Ms Quince says removing judges' discretion is a bad idea, and that Ms Hunt's idea is against fundamental legal principles, that all people should be treated the same by the law.
One is that all citizens are equal, and the second thing is proportionality. You are sentenced to an outcome that is proportionate to the harm that you've caused.
Ms Quince says Māori and Pasifika people are more likely to be on the receiving end of police brutality and violence, and in retaliating are more likely to face the harsher penalty proposed. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell-Aho.
The RSA killer William Bell has delivered an apology for his horrendous crimes before accusing corrections officers of unfairness and unconscious bias today. The triple murderer has been in the High Court seeking a judicial review of his security rating and urging a judge to consider if he's being doubly punished. Katie Todd was in court and filed this report.
William Bell's meth-fuelled rampage at the Panmure RSA in 2001 left 3 dead and branded him as one of the country's worst killers. 17 years into 30 years without parole, he is back in the High Court in Auckland, seeking a judicial review of his security classification. With help from fellow inmate Thomas Cheng via the phone, Bell is representing himself. Standing in the dock and reading from a statement, he first took the chance to speak to his crimes.
I'd like to pause here and say that I am not proud of what I did. I committed a horrendous crime that is reprehensible in any society. No amount of words can ever face the loss and the sorrow and the sufferings that I have caused to the loved ones of the victims. I am truly sorry.
Yet Bell told the court that the rule of law applies to everyone, saints, sinners or anything in between. He believes corrections officers at his prison failed to comply with the standards. In August last year, Bell says a fellow inmate called 0800 Crime Stoppers and claimed Bell was hatching a plan to escape and would do so by taking a female prison staff member hostage. Bell had his low to medium security rating temporarily bumped up to maximum, stripping him of the ability to work in the prison kitchen. That's despite what he says was minimal effort from corrections officers to investigate if there was any truth to the Crime Stoppers' claims.
Prisoners have a legitimate expectation that the prison officers would follow their own principles, policies and procedures.
Bell told the court a maximum security rating isn't something to be trivialised, and he wants prison staff held to account.
The case I bring to the courts is one example where public officials had not complied with the standards and obligations that the law demands of them in carrying out their duties. It speaks of unfairness and perhaps unconscious bias.
Bell also urged Justice Wolford to consider his track record and says he's a well-behaved prisoner.
I have never escaped. My intentions is not to escape. I've done 20 years in this place. I've only 10 years left to go before first board.
The High Court hearing is expected to take 2 days. For Checkpoint, call Katie Todd, TNA.
Queenstown businesses are welcoming new changes aimed to help recruitment, but say they're no game changer. Immigration New Zealand announced 21 tourism and hospitality roles have been added to the undersupply list for Queenstown Lakes in response to the lack of New Zealanders available to fill jobs. The change means it will be easier to hire unemployed migrants to work as waiters, cleaners, chefs, tour guides and other roles by allowing employers to support a work visa application for roles paid below the median wage. Tess Brunton has more.
Queenstown restaurant owner and chef Darren Lovell recently tried advertising for a full-time position on Work and Income. No one applied. He thought it would be easier to find staff after the waves of redundancies, but discovered the reverse has happened.
A lot of people instantly lost their jobs, and I think a lot of the workers who do the housekeeping jobs in hotels, who work as waiters and kitchen hands and cooks, fast food cooks, etc., just left town because they were scared. And no one has moved in to replace them.
He says the sigh of relief was almost audible from businesses when the undersupply list changes were announced yesterday. But it's unlikely to change anything for his businesses, Fishbone and Love Chicken, at the moment.
The difficulty with sponsoring a staff member is that you have to guarantee them 30 hours a week, and that is just so hard at the moment. You get these little spikes in tourist numbers, and hopefully Christmas, New Year, we'll be slightly busy, but not busy enough to warrant adding on any more staff.
About 1,000 migrant workers without jobs are left in Queenstown. One who asked not to be named is pleased there are fewer hurdles for migrant workers to find jobs.
My boss, he said that it's very hard to get a local. They cannot get some local to work in the hospitality, especially in cleaning. Nobody local wants to do the cleaning. Maybe you can just only count in your hand how many local wants to do it, but they will not get too long, maybe just only a month or a week, and then they look for another job because they know it. They're local, so it's easy for them. They're resident and citizen, and to get some easy job.
1 in 10 staff members at Queenstown's iconic Ferg Burger are usually New Zealand residents, but with COVID-19 border closures and lockdown, that's crept up to 1 in 3. Group General Manager Stephen Bradley is under no illusions about the recently announced changes.
All it is it saves us a bit of time. It's not a game changer, it's not a fixer, it's simply a helper. So it will give us the opportunity to keep a few more critical staff and make the processing of their visas easier.
With 130 staff on the books, he says the business is almost right for summer.
There's always, often traditionally in hospitality, you do get some resignations before Christmas, New Year period, with 2 or 3 weeks to go with notice period. So, we still need more people. So, the rules will help us get those people.
Queenstown's Chamber of Commerce Chair Craig Douglas found 106 job vacancies in this week's local weekly paper.
It's a big ask for people to move for a job that might have some varied hours. The employer's got uncertainty around giving full-time permanent jobs to people at the moment because they don't know what the demand's going to look like in the next few weeks or next few months.
That's where the working holiday visa holders usually step in. But with borders closed, they needed the government's help.
It does make it easier for employers to employ people on a sponsored visa to fill those roles. It just simplifies the process to some degree. It doesn't increase the size of the labour force in any way, but it simplifies the process. And so that takes a load off the employer and the work that they've been having to do to try and retain their sponsored workers and employ new ones.
While Queenstown businesses are grateful for the change, they hope reviewing visa extensions will be next on the government's list. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
Some of your feedback now, a lot of you getting in touch on the Auckland University house in Parnell, $5 million, the university paid for it. Joe says, what could the university do with the untaxed capital gains from the Vice-Chancellor's house if it is sold? Perhaps they could put the proceeds into support for students struggling with substandard housing stock and ridiculously high rents. Good point, Joe. If they're selling it within 5 years, they should be paying capital gains tax. Wonder if they will be. Pete says the buying of this Auckland property for a bureaucrat to live the high life is insulting at any level. Auckland University claiming it takes the management of public money very seriously, yet has no one prepared to front and defend this purchase. I do not see why anyone involved in this outrageous scandal should be allowed off the hook. On the subject of insuring low-lying houses, this person says, why do councils keep letting them be built?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Students are calling for a $5 million mansion bought for the University of Auckland Vice-Chancellor to be sold. The Auditor-General has slammed the university for buying the Parnell home, saying it failed to prove its spending fell within moderate and conservative guidelines. The President of the New Zealand Union of Students' Associations, Isabella Lenihan-Eichen, told Checkpoint the property should be put back on the market.
Because if they think that this is okay to purchase a $5 million mansion for their Vice-Chancellor, then they're completely out of line with the reality of being a student, the reality of being a staff member.
Isabella Lenihan-Eichen says the Vice-Chancellor, Dawn Freshwater, should also pay the balance of her heavily discounted rent. The Climate Change Minister says the global crisis will now be treated as seriously as any civil defence emergency. Parliament has voted in favour of a motion to declare a climate emergency. James Shaw says this declaration means that the issue has the same level of equivalence as things like natural disasters. He says climate change is the cause of the increased severity and frequency of events like floods and cyclones.
We need to treat it as an emergency with the same level of seriousness. The response is different from a civil defence emergency, of course. In this case, we need to make sure that we have a long-term approach, a just transition.
James Shaw says today's declaration will be backed by an ambitious and inclusive plan to reduce emissions. The Dannevirke community is rallying together after a horror crash yesterday that killed 3 of their young women. The crash between a car and truck happened yesterday afternoon in central Hawke's Bay along State Highway 2. A memorial space has been set up at Tararua Community Youth Service Centre. Its manager, Janine O'Brien, says young people have a space to congregate and remember their friends.
It's really important at these times that our young people aren't isolated and can sit and talk and reflect and share on the good things too.
The crash remains under investigation. The truck driver in his 50s is in a stable condition in Hawke's Bay Hospital. The police are at the scene of a sudden death in Kaiapoi, north of Christchurch. The call-out is at the home of late local man Kenneth McCall, who died in October last year after being hit by a teenage driver fleeing the police. Mr McCall left behind his husband, Owen Fraser, who continued to live at the Kaiapoi residence. A police spokesperson says inquiries are continuing into the circumstances of the death, but it doesn't appear to be suspicious. Police say their thoughts are with family and friends at this time. The government will not commit to enacting harsher punishments for people who murder police officers. The mother of slain officer Matthew Hunt presented a petition to Parliament today asking for those convicted of murdering police to get a mandatory life sentence without parole. The Police Minister Portal Williams says the petition will get the usual select committee scrutiny. She says the government is already working hard to reduce gun crime.
We're going to continue with our firearms legislation work, and that's a really important part of this. You know, we have gangs at a community level where we can do much more work in diverting young people from getting into gangs, but there's also the transnational organised crime that we are working on as well.
The Minister of Police, Portal Williams. The US Justice Department is investigating a potential bribery scheme for presidential pardons. The revelation is contained in court records unsealed in a federal court. There are no names in the papers, but the information appears to come from items seized in a raid in the last few months. CNN's Caitlin Collins has more.
This is wild, and it is something that people should keep an eye on, because basically what they're investigating is this allegation that people were funneling money into the White House or to some kind of political action committee in exchange for a presidential pardon. And of course, that is something we've been talking about as Donald Trump's time in office comes to a close. And so this was unsealed in a court record today. Some of this happened in August over the summer, a lot of the action that was happening, but we just found out about it today. And there are no names. There is no timeline provided in here because there are a ton of redactions.
CNN's Caitlin Collins. Strong wind warnings are in place for several South Island areas, with drivers of high-sided vehicles and motorcyclists advised to take particular care. The Transport Agency says they include State Highway 8 between Fairlie and Twizel and State Highway 73 from Springfield to Arthurs Pass. Met Service says Fiordland and Southland, west of Lumsden, and the Canterbury High Country are all due for severe gales, up to 120 kilometres an hour. The winds will continue for much of today in the south and will move up to the Marlborough Sounds, Wellington and Wairarapa, south of Masterton from tonight until tomorrow morning. It's 6:05. A changing of the guard has arrived for the Māori All Blacks, with 8 debutants named in the side to play Moana Pacifica in Hamilton on Saturday night. Lock Manaki Selby Rickett, midfielders Quinn Tupea and Billy Proctor, along with fullback Caleb Trask, are the newcomers in the starting 15. Hooker Kurt Eklund, prop Tamaiti Williams, loose forward Ethan Roots and halfback Rameka Poihipi will make their debuts off the bench. They are still a few veterans, or rather there are still a few veterans around, including Captain Ash Dixon, Liam Messam at number 8 and prop Josh Honick, who last played for the side in 2015. Meanwhile, the disgraced former Argentina captain Pablo Matera and teammates Guido Pitti and Santiago Soseno will remain with the Pumas camp until the end of the Australia tour, despite being suspended for historical racist comments on social media. The Black Caps bowler Trent Boult is banking on the side's local knowledge to help them continue their run of test success on home soil. The first of 2 tests against the West Indies starts in Hamilton tomorrow. The Black Caps have won their last 6 test series at home and haven't lost here since March 2017. Boult says the recipe for that success has been simple.
Just that experience of guys that have played a lot of cricket in our own conditions. As a bowling unit, it's probably easier for me to speak on behalf. We're a group that's very clear with what we're trying to do, I suppose. Guys that have been able to take wickets in many different stages of the match, and we're very clear with how we want to take those 20 wickets.
Trent Boult, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Francesco Van Eerd, perfumer who, for the centenary of the publication of Catherine Mansfield's 3rd collection of short stories, has created a new literary scent inspired by the story Bliss. The BBC's Alan Dean looks for the positives in social media, while our overseas correspondent in Japan, Motoko Kakabayashi, talks about modern motherhood, Tokyo style, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine with isolated afternoon showers in Northland. A few showers tomorrow, clearing later. Waitomo to Wellington, including the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Fine, then cloud developing tonight. Brief rain tomorrow morning, then fine. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places of Wellington and Wairarapa for a time. Nelson City, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Isolated showers inland Marlborough tomorrow, severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places. And for the remainder of Nelson, Buller and Westland, cloudy with patchy drizzle. Rain spreading north today, briefly heavy, easing to isolated showers tomorrow. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, scattered showers becoming confined to coastal Southland and Fiordland tomorrow. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places, easing tomorrow evening. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, but rain for a time tomorrow. RNZ National, it is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. There's a call for Auckland University's Vice-Chancellor to pay back thousands of dollars in discounted rent for a $5 million house in one of the city's priciest suburbs. The varsity bought the 4-bedroom Parnell house, complete with swimming pool and spa, and was renting it to VC Dawn Freshwater at cut-price rates. Auckland University justified the purchase and cheap rent by claiming the house would be used for fundraisers and hosting official university guests, and it was also a recruiting tool. But an Auditor General's report has found there was no business case for the purchase and no justification for the significant rent discount. It also said the uni's decision to buy the property was not based on objective criteria, and Auckland University was unable to show the expenditure was moderate and conservative. Well, joining me now is the National President of the Tertiary Education Union, Dr. Michael Gilchrist. Michael, that is a long list of missteps. How would you describe the university's handling of this?
Well, from our point of view, Lisa, this report has kind of lifted the lid on a broader problem. The Auditor General has reported that this particular expenditure wasn't justifiable, impartial, transparent, and so on, and didn't follow the university's own policies. But most of those concerns apply, from our members' point of view, to current decision-making more broadly, and in particular to the proposal the plans to cut 300 staff, to make them redundant, about 5% of the workforce. And we don't believe that decision is justified or transparent, and we hope that this report may, prompt a change in that area.
So you're talking specifically about Auckland University here?
Look, with all of our universities, we have the problem that they run on a commercial model, and that means making surpluses on the model of making profits for shareholders and on enriching senior management. What this report shows is how far our universities, and in this case it's Auckland, have kind of lost sight of their mission, which is to serve the public good, to serve the public interest, to provide high quality, equitable, accessible public education, particularly for our domestic students.
We've been getting a bit of feedback from people who work at Auckland University, and they say they've been told to tighten their belts, that hours have been reduced, there's threats of redundancy, yet they look at this spending and, well, it sends a totally different message. What are people on that campus saying to you?
Well, they have been asking for some time for much more transparency in the decision-making, much more information about the financial situation. For example, the university's been quite deceptive in some of the claims it's made about its financial position. It said that they were looking at a $48 million loss for 2023. In fact, it was an $8 million debt. They're looking at an $8 million deficit. The sale of this house could probably cover that. In 2023, the $40 million added in there was their projected surplus. So they were talking about a loss, including their surplus. And that's quite deceptive. And we see that in this case, the Auditor General has found there was no justification, no formal business case presented. The same could be said for this current process of massively cutting back on staff, when there will be just about equal numbers, at least, probably even greater numbers of students overall, with domestic students flowing in. There's no consultation, no evaluation, no assessment. Staff are not involved, and the mission of the university is being lost sight of.
The decision to sign off on this particular chunk of money, the $5 million for the house, it was signed off by a single person, the former Vice-Chancellor, ticked the box and the money was spent. Is that sufficient scrutiny?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a $10 million financial delegation to the Vice-Chancellor, which he exercised. Absolutely not. And from the board down, we have to do much better. We need much more transparent decision-making, much better justification. As I say, most important of all, the whole kind of the mission, the purpose, and the strategic goals of the organisation need to be kept more clearly in mind.
How much does a VC get paid, Vice-Chancellor?
Well, this report says that the Vice-Chancellor is paid the fourth highest paid public servant in the country, the Vice-Chancellor of Auckland University. I think that's around $700K. I couldn't quote you the figure, but, they're paid well up there, yeah.
So fourth highest a public servant, according to the report. Can they afford to pay market rent?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, as I say, this is a function of that commercial model. Unfortunately, there are two goals: to provide returns for shareholders, and to provide the best possible conditions for senior management, referring to an international market which is artificially inflated.
So, what does that Parnell House represent to you and the people that you represent?
Look, our members, there'll be real anger amongst our members, and they'll be saying that there has to be change. There have to be changes in how things are done and what things are done, what decisions are made. And in particular, it's not too late to scale back dramatically on the current plans for redundancies and look at how the university can be responsible to those it's really serving, which are the students of the country and the public more generally, and take the right strategic approach in order to serve that purpose.
If that is what is supposed to happen or needs to happen, Michael, how do you make it happen? Because speaking to the Auditor General's office, being embarrassed publicly, having sunlight poured on bad decisions, well, that's the punishment.
Yeah, it's the start, really, isn't it? But look, we need staff, our members, we need students as well to join forces. We need the public to demand a real change in how things are done in these institutions. And that means shifting away from that commercial model, and it means the government too has to put the pressure on to see a different kind of decision-making process and structure in the universities.
Is there anything from within Auckland University that suggests they're open to what you're saying?
Well, as I say, they have been quite deceptive, we think, in some of their statements so far on what they're doing. The problem with their current processes is that there is no careful assessment, consultation or planning of this huge change, which could lead to a step change backward in the quality of education offered at Auckland University to our New Zealand students in the absence of international students. Because you have the same number of students, you've cut back staff, you're cutting back expenditure in order to realise surpluses in the future. And that can only lead to one thing.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's the National President of the Tertiary Education Union, Dr. Michael Gilchrist. And just a reminder, we did ask Auckland University to provide someone for an interview today, anyone. They said they weren't available. The government has declared a national climate emergency, acknowledging the urgency required to tackle the global crisis. Its critics call the motion a mere marketing stunt, but the Prime Minister says it will be accompanied by concrete action and the public sector will act first. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
She called it her generation's nuclear-free moment. Today, Jacinda Ardern went further. An official emergency, a climate crisis.
Vote in favour of this declaration today. Be on the right side of history. Be part of the solution we must collectively deliver for the next generation.
The motion makes New Zealand the 33rd nation to enact the symbolic gesture to formally recognise the dangers posed by global warming.
Threat to life, threat to property, civil defence emergencies. If we do not respond to climate change, we will continue to have those emergencies on our shore.
Declaring a climate emergency is nothing but virtue signalling.
Slogans over substance.
Actions speak louder than words.
That was the mantra from the opposition. The declaration declared a marketing stunt. National and ACT say it's devoid of meaning, much to the bafflement of Green co-leader and Climate Change Minister James Shaw.
I want to say, if they think that this declaration is devoid of substance, then I look forward to their full-hearted support of every single policy that we introduce over the next 3 years to actually put some substance into this and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. You want to put your money where your mouth is, folks.
And the motion does come with some concrete action, the criticism clearly anticipated by the government. It came with a commitment. The public sector will have to be carbon neutral by 2025. If they can't, they'll have to cough up from their budget to offset emissions. Most agencies and departments will have to exclusively buy electric vehicles. They'll have to phase out coal boilers and bring all buildings up to a green standard.
We must get our own house in order. How can we stand and take a leadership position amongst the private sector unless we take the same action that we expect of them?
But for climate change activists, it's not enough. Greenpeace has long called for a declaration and applauds it today. But it comes with a caveat, and one not too dissimilar from the lines delivered by opposition parties.
We've heard a lot of rhetoric from this government. New Zealand's talked a big game about tackling climate change, but we still have a long way to go in achieving results.
Campaigner Kate Simcock says the government needs to act as if there is an emergency and needs to crack down on agriculture, the source of nearly half New Zealand's emissions.
We really need to start addressing the whole picture, and that means looking at agriculture. This government is not serious about climate change until it starts doing that.
New Zealand contributes less than 0.2% to global emissions, but stacks up poorly against other countries. It's one of just 12 out of 43 industrialised nations which saw net emissions increase between 1990 and 2018. Today's declaration is unlikely to allay public pressure. Indeed, it may heighten it. Can the government live up to its rhetoric? Atu I te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
The wife of one of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine is upset at ongoing speculation about what caused the explosion. Some of the families have employed an electrical engineer to investigate the cause and are releasing evidence through the media to support his theory that it was sparked by a faulty ventilation fan. But Anna Osborne is worried these leaks could jeopardise any future prosecution and that the speculation is only raising false hopes amongst the families. Rachel Graham reports.
Richard Healy is most famous as the whistleblower who lifted the lid on years of underinvestment that left Dunedin with hundreds of dangerous power poles. But for the past 2 years, his energies have been focused on coming up with what he calls a working hypothesis. This is that an underground ventilation fan, just on the other side of a major rockfall, was what sparked the methane and caused the explosion. The latest bit of evidence is a 3-metre-long, 1-tonne piece of metal Mr. Healy saw on a visit to the mine, which he says is from the fan. He says it was pulled from deep inside the entry tunnel around 2 months ago.
So what we think has happened is the fan body has come out of that drive like a cannonball out of the barrel of a gun, and it's impacted on the left wall. Now that's clearly going to damage the left wall and therefore the support for the roof in that area. We think that's probably initiated the rockfall. Then the explosion has come from expanded into the body of the mine, over quite a long period of time. So that's caused an extremely fast flow of gas down the drift. That's picked up that section of fan and thrown it in front of it down the drift.
Richard Healy does not claim to be an expert in underground coal mine explosions. He says he is looking at Pike River because he was asked to by some of the families, and because nobody else is willing to ask the same questions he is asking.
And that's why I've always insisted on being just described simply as an investigator in all this. Like, I knew instantly as soon as I saw the graph that was provided by police that they'd got the story of the first electrical event completely wrong. But basically, I don't have the sort of credentials that would allow me to stand up in court and say that, so I got a protection engineer who does have those credentials to do it.
Anna Osborne, who lost her husband Milton in the mine, is a spokesperson for the Family Reference Group, representing 27 of the 31 families affected by the disaster. She says leaking photos to the media of potentially crucial bits of evidence could damage the police case if charges are ever laid.
It will work right into the defence's hands if people don't stop doing it. So it's quite dangerous to have a trial by media. We need any evidence or information people have to go to the police.
She says the speculation is hurtful to the families, who are desperate for the truth to be told about why their men died and who is to blame.
It's giving false hope to the families, and there's probably more than 3 or 4 things that could have caused the explosion. So for me, it's hurtful to just be released and without giving any real regard to the families who are expecting the police to do the job.
Anna Osborne says family members who feel they cannot trust the police to conduct a thorough investigation need to know that the officers now in charge of looking at the case are different to the ones involved in the original inquiry. She says they are now at a crucial stage in the process and stand the best chance yet of uncovering the vital piece of evidence that could lead to charges being laid. The police say they are not able to comment on any aspect of their investigation while it is ongoing. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rachel Graham, tēnei.
It's 24 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Cruel and degrading treatment at a Salvation Army home for unmarried mothers has been outlined to the inquiry into abuse in care. Andrew McRae filed this report in a warning some may find parts of this story distressing.
When Anne-Marie Shelley fell pregnant at 17, her parents kicked her out. Homeless and penniless, she ended up at Bethany, a Salvation Army home for unmarried mothers in Wellington. She was there in 1973, along with 16 others aged between 14 and 21.
I cannot adequately describe the atmosphere of desolation in that place and the piteous sound of so many of us crying quietly into our pillows at night.
They each received a weekly benefit of $25, with half going to Bethany. What little was left was usually spent on food to supplement what Anne-Marie describes as the slops they were given.
The food was scarce and atrocious. The milk was off, the butter was rancid. We often vomited after meals, but there was nothing we could do. None of us had anywhere else to go.
She depicts Bethany as a dilapidated Dickensian building riddled with fleas.
The fleas were in our pillows and the mattresses, and not even the toxic kerosene flea bombs the exterminators regularly put through the place could get rid of them.
She says the Salvation Army major in charge was constantly putting them down and in their place.
Made sure we never forgot that we were delinquents, deviants and sinners.
Mrs. Shelley says they were all made to do domestic work, no matter how advanced their pregnancy was or how they were feeling.
You still had to scrub floors on your hands and knees with a scrubbing brush, scrub the baths and toilets, do all the washing of the bed linen and the wringer washing machines, and hang the heavy sheets out on the lines. No matter how nauseated you were, you still had to do the cooking, do the pig buckets.
2 weeks after she had a baby boy, she was told to go into town to do an errand.
I rushed back to be in time for his afternoon feed, raced up the stairs to the nursery, but his bassinet was empty. The adoptive parents had come and taken him. He was gone.
She says she was dazed and in complete shock.
I couldn't believe any human being could be as cruel as the staff who sent me uptown, knowing I was coming back to nothing. I hadn't even said goodbye to him. I had no photo of him, no last cuddle, no last kiss, no last touch of him, no last smell of him.
Ms. Shelley says social workers had lied to her, telling her she had to give up her baby because there was no financial support available for single mothers. Later she found out this was a lie, as the newly brought in domestic purposes benefit meant she would have qualified for a range of assistance. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
After some tough months, many Australians separated by border restrictions are looking forward to reuniting with family and friends for Christmas. Western Australia will reopen its borders to Victoria and New South Wales with no need to quarantine. Experts say contact tracing and an alert system, similar to the one here, could help keep borders open, even if outbreaks arise. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald has more.
Melbourne woman Felicia hasn't seen her family in Western Australia for a year, so she couldn't be happier. She's now allowed to travel there in time for Christmas.
As soon as it got announced, my mum messaged me and my two best friends messaged me. I think I squealed a little. Very, very excited.
From next week, visitors from Victoria and New South Wales will be able to enter WA without having to self-isolate for 2 weeks. After months of border closures, almost every state and territory will welcome interstate visitors back in time for Christmas. There's still some restrictions on people from South Australia. But there's no guarantee borders will remain open if there are any outbreaks between now and the 25th of December. Dr Tambri Housen, an infectious disease epidemiologist at the University of Newcastle, says without without a nationally recognised definition for a hotspot, border closures should be measured against risk.
If sporadic cases do show up and they're able to test and trace their contacts and really contain the outbreak in a timely manner, there would be no reason to close borders. But, where that source of exposure can't be identified is when they'll consider more stringent measures.
But much of that will come down to how the community responds to an outbreak.
If there's widespread testing, then officials can feel comfortable that their decisions are based on sound evidence. And if, people are open and honest with contact tracers when they are contacted.
And that report was from the ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald's. Bit of feedback before we head off. Christine's got in touch about the shortage of bikes. Talk to any bike shop owner and you will find that there are shortages of all bikes, especially electric bikes. So it's not just the kids missing out. They're losing so much business and have been for several months. Now that is due to some delays, gnarl-ups at Auckland Port. We're back tomorrow. Catch you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The ACT Party says the declaration of a climate emergency is a political stunt that offers no solutions. RSA triple murderer William Bell has apologised for his crimes in 2001 during a High Court appearance today. The Accident Compensation Corporation has posted a $5.9 billion deficit for the past year due to falling interest rates. And 67 jobs will be lost when clothing manufacturer Dean Apparel closes its Christchurch factory. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
But what's really different now is that they are launching a propaganda war against Australia and any other target that they identify.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
People with better information make better decisions. A significant number of our people will destroy their drugs in front of us. Other people will just say, I'm not going to take this.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guest after the news